The day Ethan Blackwood came home early was never meant to exist in the timeline of his perfectly controlled life, because men like Ethan, self-made millionaires who ruled boardrooms and bent markets to their will, did not arrive home before midnight, did not abandon meetings, did not feel sudden, unexplainable dread clawing at their chest. Yet that afternoon his car turned into the long gravel driveway of his estate hours ahead of schedule, his phone unanswered in his clenched fist, his heart pounding for reasons he could not explain, because somewhere between signing contracts and firing another executive, a memory he had buried 10 years ago had risen like a ghost, small hands, a woman's trembling voice, a promise he never kept, and when he stepped out of the car, silence greeted him, the kind of silence that feels alive, watching, judging, and as he walked through the manicured garden toward the back lawn, that was when he saw it, and the world tilted violently on its axis, because there on the grass was Lily, the quiet maid he barely acknowledged, down on her hands and knees, laughing breathlessly as a baby rode on her back like a knight on a steed, the child's giggles ringing through the air like shattered glass. But it wasn't the innocence of the scene that nearly made Ethan faint, it was the baby's face, because those eyes, those unmistakable gray-blue eyes, stared straight into him with the same spark he saw every morning in the mirror, and his knees weakened as a truth he had denied for a decade crashed into him with merciless force, because the child was his, and Lily felt it before she saw him, the laughter dying in her throat, her body stiffening as she slowly turned her head, her face draining of color when their eyes met, because in that moment there was no millionaire and no maid, only two people bound by a past soaked in fear, secrecy, and sacrifice, and as Ethan staggered forward, gripping the garden bench to steady himself, his voice came out hoarse and broken as he whispered the only word that mattered, "How old is he?" And Lily swallowed hard, lifting the child into her arms protectively, her voice trembling as she answered, 5, because 5 years ago she had been a young assistant in Ethan's startup, brilliant, invisible, overlooked, until one late night of shared exhaustion and vulnerability changed everything, until love became a liability, until Ethan chose ambition over responsibility, until Lily disappeared with nothing but a promise to protect the life growing inside her, and now that life clung to her neck, unaware that the man staring at him was the father who had unknowingly funded charities while his own son wore hand-me-downs, and Ethan's mind raced back through every arrogant decision he had made, every excuse, every time he convinced himself that walking away had been necessary, and the shame hit him so hard he had to sit down, because while he had built an empire, Lily had built a human being, and when the child reached out with a tiny hand toward him, smiling without fear, Ethan broke completely, tears spilling freely for the first time since his father's funeral decades earlier, and Lily watched him carefully, because she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, prepared herself for anger, rejection, threats, but she was unprepared for remorse, unprepared for a man on his knees whispering apologies to a child who didn't yet understand the weight of forgiveness, and when Ethan asked why she never told him, Lily's voice hardened just enough to cut, as she said she had seen what ambition had turned him into, a man who measured worth in numbers, not in people, and she refused to let her son grow up as an inconvenience, and that truth hurt worse than any accusation, because it was undeniable, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn, Ethan realized something terrifying. He could not undo the past, but he could destroy the future just as easily if he didn't change. And so he made a choice that shocked even himself, because he asked Lily to stay, not as a maid, not as a secret, but as family, and Lily hesitated, because trust once shattered does not rebuild with money or words, but when her son wrapped his arms around Ethan's neck and laughed, calling him the sad man, something softened inside her, something she thought had died long ago, and that night the mansion felt smaller, warmer, less like a monument to ego and more like a home, and over the weeks that followed, Ethan learned what real wealth looked like, bedtime stories instead of balance sheets, scraped knees instead of stock crashes, laughter echoing through halls once filled only with silence, and Lily watched the man she once loved become someone worthy of love again, not because he was rich, but because he showed up, every single day, and when the truth finally went public, headlines screamed scandal, but Ethan didn't flinch, because for the first time, he had something more valuable than reputation. And as he stood one morning watching his son race across the garden, Lily beside him, he understood that nearly fainting that day wasn't weakness, it was awakening, because sometimes life doesn't shock you to destroy you, it shocks you awake, and if this story moved you, if it reminded you that humanity matters more than money, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors, and the next one might just change how you see the world.